Section 1.2, the process of science. By the end of this section, you will be able to identify the shared characteristics of the natural sciences, understand the process of scientific inquiry, compare inductive reasoning with deductive reasoning, and describe the goals of basic science and applied science. Figure 1.14, formerly called blue-green algae, the cyanobacteria, shown in A, seen through a light microscope, are some of Earth's oldest life forms. In B, these stromatolites along the shores of Lake Thetis in Western Australia are ancient structures formed by the layering of cyanobacteria in shallow waters. Like geology, physics, and chemistry, biology is a science that gathers knowledge about the natural world. Specifically, biology is the study of life. The discoveries of biology are made by a community of researchers who work individually and together using agreed-on methods. In this sense, biology, like all sciences, is a social enterprise like politics or the arts. The methods of science include careful observation, record-keeping, logical and mathematical reasoning, experimentation, and submitting conclusions to the scrutiny of others. Science also requires considerable imagination and creativity. A well-designed experiment is commonly described as elegant or beautiful. Like politics, science has considerable practical implications, and some science is dedicated to practical applications, such as the prevention of disease. Other science proceeds largely motivated by curiosity. Whatever its goal, there is no doubt that science, including biology, has transformed human existence and will continue to do so. Figure 1.15. Biologists may choose to study E. coli, a bacterium that is a normal resident of our digestive tracts, but which also is sometimes responsible for disease outbreaks. In this micrograph, the bacterium is visualized using a scanning electron microscope and digital colorization. The nature of science. Biology is a science, but what exactly is science? What does the study of biology share with other scientific disciplines? Science, from the Latin scientia, meaning knowledge, can be defined as knowledge about the natural world. Science is a very specific way of learning or knowing about the world. The history of the past 500 years demonstrates that science is a very powerful way of knowing about the world. It is largely responsible for the technological revolutions that have taken place during this time. There are, however, areas of knowledge and human experience that the methods of science cannot be applied to. These include such things as answering purely moral questions, aesthetic questions, or what can generally be categorized as spiritual questions. Science cannot investigate these areas because they are outside the realm of material phenomena, the phenomena of matter and energy, and cannot be observed and measured. The scientific method is a method of research with defined steps that include experiments and careful observation. The steps of the scientific method will be examined in detail later, but one of the most important aspects of this method is the testing of hypotheses. A hypothesis is a suggested explanation for an event, which can be tested. Hypotheses, or tentative explanations, are generally produced within the context of a scientific theory. A generally accepted scientific theory is thoroughly tested and a confirmed explanation for a set of observations or phenomena. Scientific theory is the foundation of scientific knowledge. In addition, in many scientific disciplines, less so in biology, there are scientific laws, often expressed in mathematical formulas which describe how elements of nature will behave under certain specific conditions. There is not an evolution of hypotheses through theories to laws as if they represented some increase in certainty about the world. Hypotheses are the day-to-day material that scientists work with, and they are developed within the context of theories. Laws are concise descriptions of parts of the world that are amenable to formulaic or mathematical description. Natural sciences. What would you expect to see in a museum of natural sciences? Frogs, plants, dinosaur skeletons, exhibits about how the brain functions, a planetarium, gems and minerals, or maybe all of the above. Science includes such diverse fields as astronomy, biology, computer sciences, geology, logic, physics, chemistry, and mathematics. However, those fields of science related to the physical world and its phenomena and processes are considered natural sciences. Thus, a museum of natural sciences might contain any of the items listed above. Figure 1:16. Some fields of science include astronomy, biology, computer science, geology, logic, physics, chemistry, and mathematics. There is no complete agreement when it comes to defining what the natural sciences include. For some experts, the natural sciences are astronomy, biology, chemistry, earth science, and physics. Other scholars choose to divide natural sciences into life sciences, which study living things and include biology, and physical sciences, which study non living matter and include astronomy, physics, and chemistry. Some disciplines, such as biophysics and biochemistry, build on two sciences and are interdisciplinary. Scientific inquiry. One thing is common to all forms of science: an ultimate goal to know. Curiosity and inquiry are the driving forces for the development of science. Scientists seek to understand the world and the way it operates. Two methods of logical thinking are used: inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is a form of logical thinking that uses related observations to arrive at a general conclusion. This type of reasoning is common in descriptive science. A life scientist, such as a biologist, makes observations and records them. These data can be qualitative, descriptive, or quantitative, consisting of numbers, and the raw data can be supplemented with drawings, pictures, photos, or videos. From many observations, the scientist can infer conclusions, inductions, based on evidence. Inductive reasoning involves formulating generalizations inferred from careful observation and the analysis of a large amount of data. Brain studies often work this way. Many brains are observed while people are doing a task. The part of the brain that lights up, indicating activity, is then demonstrated to be the part controlling the response to that task. Deductive reasoning, or deduction, is the type of logic used in hypothesis-based science. In deductive reasoning, the pattern of thinking moves in the opposite direction as compared to inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is a form of logical thinking that uses a general principle or law to predict specific results. From those general principles, a scientist can deduce and predict the specific results that would be valid as long as the general principles are valid. For example, a prediction would be that if the climate is becoming warmer in a region, the distribution of plants and animals should change. Comparisons have been made between distributions in the past and the present, and the many changes that have been found are consistent with a warming climate. Finding the change in distribution is evidence that the climate change conclusion is a valid one. Both types of logical thinking are related to the two main pathways of scientific study: descriptive science and hypothesis-based science. Descriptive, or discovery science, aims to observe, explore, and discover, while hypothesis-based science begins with a specific question or problem and a potential answer or solution that can be tested. The boundary between these two forms of study is often blurred because most scientific endeavors combine both approaches. Observations lead to questions. Questions lead to forming a hypothesis as a possible answer to those questions, and then the hypothesis is tested. Thus, descriptive science and hypothesis-based science are in continuous dialogue. Hypothesis testing. Biologists study the living world by posing questions about it and seeking science-based responses. This approach is common to other sciences as well and is often referred to as the scientific method. The scientific method was used even in ancient times, but it was first documented by England's Sir Francis Bacon, who lived from 1561 to 1626, who set up inductive methods for scientific inquiry. The scientific method is not exclusively used by biologists, but it can be applied to almost anything as a logical problem-solving method. Figure 117. Sir Francis Bacon is credited with being the first to document the scientific method. The scientific process typically starts with an observation, often a problem to be solved, that leads to a question. Let's think about a simple problem that starts with an observation and apply the scientific method to solve the problem. One Monday morning, a student arrives at class and quickly discovers that the classroom is too warm. That is an observation that also describes a problem. The classroom is too warm. The student then asks a question. Why is the classroom so warm? Recall that a hypothesis is a suggested explanation that can be tested. To solve a problem, several hypotheses may be proposed. For example, one hypothesis might be the classroom is warm because no one turned on the air conditioning. But there could be other responses to the question, and therefore other hypotheses may be proposed. A second hypothesis might be the classroom is warm because there is a power failure, and so the air conditioning doesn't work. Once a hypothesis has been selected, a prediction may be made. A prediction is similar to a hypothesis, but it typically has the format if then. For example, the prediction for the first hypothesis might be if the student turns on the air conditioning, then the classroom will no longer be too warm. A hypothesis must be testable to ensure that it is valid. For example, a hypothesis that depends on what a bear thinks is not testable because it can never know what a bear thinks. It should also be falsifiable, meaning that it can be disproven by experimental results. An example of an unfalsifiable hypothesis is Botticelli's Birth of Venus is Beautiful. There is no experiment that might show this statement to be false. To test a hypothesis, a researcher will conduct one or more experiments designed to eliminate one or more of the hypotheses. This is important. A hypothesis can be disproven or eliminated, but it can never be proven. Science does not deal in proofs like mathematics. If an experiment fails to disprove a hypothesis, then we find support for that explanation. But this is not to say that down the road a better explanation will not be found, or a more carefully designed experiment will be found to falsify the hypothesis. Each experiment will have one or more variables and one or more controls. A variable is any part of the experiment that can vary or change during the experiment. A control is a part of the experiment that does not change. Look for the variables and controls in the experiment that follows. As a simple example, an experiment might be conducted to test the hypothesis that phosphate limits the growth of algae in freshwater ponds. A series of artificial ponds are filled with water, and half of them are treated by adding phosphate each week, while the other half are treated by adding a salt that is known not to be used by algae. The variable here is the phosphate, or lack of phosphate. The experimental or treatment cases are the ponds with added phosphate, and the control ponds are those with something inert added, such as the salt. Just adding something is also a good control against the possibility that adding extra matter to the pond has an effect. If the treated ponds show lesser growth of algae, then we have found support for our hypothesis. If they do not, then we reject our hypothesis. Be aware that rejecting one hypothesis does not determine whether or not other hypotheses can be accepted. It simply eliminates one hypothesis that is not valid. Using the scientific method, the hypotheses that are inconsistent with experimental data are rejected. In recent years, a new approach of testing hypotheses has developed as a result of an exponential growth of data deposited in various databases. Using computer algorithms and statistical analysis of data in databases, a new field of so-called data research, also referred to as in silico research, provides new methods of data analyses and their interpretation. This will increase the demand for specialists in both biology and computer science, a promising career opportunity. Figure 118. The scientific method is a series of defined steps that include experiments and careful observation. If a hypothesis is not supported by data, a new hypothesis can be proposed. In practice, the scientific method is not as rigid and structured as it might at first appear. Sometimes an experiment leads to conclusions that favor a change in approach. Often, an experiment brings entirely new scientific questions to the puzzle. Many times, science does not operate in a linear fashion. Instead, scientists continually draw inferences and make generalizations, finding patterns as their research proceeds. Scientific reasoning is more complex than the scientific method alone suggests. Basic and applied science. The scientific community has been debating for the last few decades about the value of different types of science. Is it valuable to pursue science for the sake of simply gaining knowledge? Or does scientific knowledge only have worth if we can apply it to solving a specific problem or bettering our lives? This question focuses on the difference between two types of science: basic science and applied science. Basic science, or pure science, seeks to expand knowledge regardless of the short term application of that knowledge. It is not focused on developing a product or a service of immediate public or commercial value. The immediate goal of basic science is knowledge for knowledge's sake, though this does not mean that in the end it may not result in an application. In contrast, applied science, or technology, aims to use science to solve real world problems, making it possible, for example, to improve a crop yield, find a cure for a particular disease, or save animals threatened by a natural disaster. In applied science, the problem is usually defined for the researcher. Some individuals may perceive applied science as useful and basic science as useless. A question these people might pose to a scientist advocating knowledge acquisition would be, what for? A careful look at the history of science, however, reveals that basic knowledge has resulted in many remarkable applications of great value. Many scientists think that a basic understanding of science is necessary before an application is developed. Therefore, applied science relies on the results generated through basic science. Other scientists think that it is time to move on from basic science and instead to find solutions to actual problems. Both approaches are valid. It is true that there are problems that demand immediate attention. However, few solutions would be found without the help of the knowledge generated through basic science. One example of how basic and applied science can work together to solve practical problems occurred after the discovery of DNA structure led to an understanding of the molecular mechanisms governing DNA replication. Strands of DNA, unique in every human, are found in our cells, where they provide the instructions necessary for life. During DNA replication, new copies of DNA are made shortly before a cell divides to form new cells. Understanding the mechanisms of DNA replication enabled scientists to develop laboratory techniques that are now used to identify genetic diseases, pinpoint individuals who are at a crime scene, and determine paternity. Without basic science, it is unlikely that applied science could exist. Another example of the link between basic and applied research is the Human Genome Project, a study in which each human chromosome was analyzed and mapped to determine the precise sequence of DNA subunits and the exact location of each gene. The gene is the basic unit of heredity, represented by a specific DNA segment that codes for a functional molecule. Other organisms have also been studied as part of this project to gain a better understanding of human chromosomes. The Human Genome Project relied on basic research carried out with non-human organisms and later with the human genome. An important end goal eventually became using the data for applied research seeking cures for genetically related diseases. Figure 119. The Human Genome Project was a 13-year collaborative effort among researchers working in several different fields of science. The project was completed in 2003. While research efforts in both basic science and applied science are usually carefully planned, it is important to note that some discoveries are made by serendipity, that is, by means of a fortunate accident or a lucky surprise. Penicillin was discovered when biologist Alexander Fleming accidentally left a petri dish of Staphylococcus bacteria open. An unwanted mold grew, killing the bacteria. The mold turned out to be penicillium, and a new critically important antibiotic was discovered. In a similar manner, Percy Levon Julian was an established medicinal chemist working on a way to mass produce compounds with which to manufacture important drugs. He was focused on using soybean oil in the production of progesterone, a hormone important in the menstrual cycle and pregnancy. But it wasn't until water accidentally leaked into a soybean oil storage tank that he found his method. Immediately recognizing the resulting substance as stigmasterol, a primary ingredient in progesterone and similar drugs, he began the process of replicating and industrializing the process in a manner that has helped millions of people. Even in the highly organized world of science, luck, when combined with an observant, curious mind focused on the types of reasoning discussed above, can lead to unexpected breakthroughs. Reporting scientific work. Whether scientific research is basic science or applied science, scientists must share their findings for other researchers to expand and build upon their discoveries. Communication and collaboration within and between subdisciplines of science are key to the advancement of knowledge in science. For this reason, an important aspect of a scientist's work is disseminating results and communicating with peers. Scientists can share results by presenting them at a scientific meeting or conference, but this approach can reach only the limited few who are present. Instead, most scientists present their results in peer-reviewed articles that are published in scientific journals. Peer-reviewed articles are scientific papers that are reviewed, usually anonymously by a scientist's colleagues or peers. These colleagues are qualified individuals, often experts in the same research area, who judge whether or not the scientist's work is suitable for publication. The process of peer review helps to ensure that the research described in a scientific paper or grant proposal is original, significant, logical, and thorough. Grant proposals, which are requests for research funding, are also subject to peer review. Scientists publish their work so other scientists can reproduce their experiments under similar or different conditions to expand on the findings. There are many journals and the popular press that do not use a peer review system. A large number of online open access journals, journals with articles available without cost, are now available, many of which use rigorous peer review systems, but some of which do not. Results of any studies published in these forums without peer review are not reliable and should not form the basis for other scientific work. In one exception, journals may allow a researcher to cite a personal communication from another researcher about unpublished results with the cited author's permission.